this computer. All right, I've started recording. So me and Malcolm, this is we've been making a bunch of videos over the years, I guess, over the months. And I was just telling Malcolm that I would like to hear him introduce himself and just to vibe it out and feel what it's like to hear someone that you already know, but have them introduce themselves. So, Malcolm, uh, would you kindly introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. So I am Malcolm Ocean, and I I've always been very interested in the interfaces of things, where things fit together and how they make contact and touch. And I've that interest has been something that permeates how I pay attention in lots of ways. It causes me to think quite a lot about design and to be quite opinionated about design, which um like I can pick up almost anything and just sort of be like, like how would this be better designed? So it's like, here I've got this remote, for like turning on colored lights. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty well designed in various ways. It's, sticks on the wall like a switch, but like, y- you know, like how could this be better? It could the buttons that like toggle the brightness somehow feel like they're not alive enough. Anyway, I don't quite want to go into so much depth in that specific thing, but like even like the knowing that this is good, the feeling the goodness of it is something that comes quite naturally to me. And so I think a lot about interfaces between people and designed objects. um I also think a lot about the interfaces between people and other people, like how do people converse, how do they um make meaning together, how do they um be be in the same world together. And that's part of like, I initially thought that wasn't that connected in some ways to like to interfacing, like the question of like what is it like to be you, um almost seemed like a separate question, because interfacing is about the surface and what is it like to be you is about the interiority. But I recently read something called about the interface theory of perception, by, I think the guy's name is Donald Hoffman, which basically posits that actually all of our experience is less reality and more an interface we have with reality. Um, which is a very trippy thought. And he's got evolutionary justifications for why this, like, basically metabolically must be so, in terms of efficiency, which is kind of interesting. He's done some experiments with like little simulations and stuff. Um, and so that suggests that part of what's going on when people have clashes between stuff is actually that they have conflicting interfaces. Like I want to interface with, I interface with my reality like this, and you interface with yours like that. And um, so yeah, and so you know, I think a lot of why people get tense with each other is they see each other in ways that they don't like being seen. Um, and so coming back to, this being me introducing myself, it's like if I'm really attending to the experience of like, okay, other people are looking at this and they're having a perception of me. It's like, how are they seeing me? Am I allowing them to see me the way that they will, or am I trying to get them to see me a particular way? And if I'm trying to get them to see me a particular way, there can be a kind of grasping quality, a kind of almost sort of reaching into their head and trying to massage my image in their head. Which is different from like, like a thing I can do is like, oh, like, I want you to see me without my glasses or something. It's like, okay, well, I can take off my glasses. That's not controlling how you see me. That's controlling what there is for you to see.
Mm.
But I can still let you have whatever experience of that you want. I might think I look better without my glasses on, but maybe you actually think I look better with them on. And like, I can't control that. Like, that's not sort of up for me to decide. Um, yeah. And some of the most ecstatic experiences that I've had in my life have been ones of people dropping in really deeply together and really feeling like a sense of like, oh, we're perceiving the world together. It's like my you know, my view on the world is like, you know, this eye, and your view on the world is that eye, and together those eyes are forming this like 3D depth perception kind of view. And I found that to be, yeah, a really thrilling experience on various scales. And um one that I definitely want a lot more of in my life. And I guess when I say various scales, I mean often it's like dropped in person, like, you know, in a circle conversation or around a table, or, you know, out for a walk and perceiving the world that we're walking through. Um, on which note, like, one of the interesting things about walking with somebody is you get to sort of look at things and have opinions about what's going on together, and you get to like sort of calibrate together on like, and especially if you walk the same neighborhood a bunch of times with the same person, like, oh, what's going on with that house, there's something weird there, and you can kind of feel into it, and like that is the sort of the two eyes looking at something together. But it also applies to scales like, you know, uh being on Twitter with people and feeling like we're all kind of groping around related concepts and like, what is this? How does it all fit together? Um and I feel very sensitive to the ways in which like tiny changes in the medium or in the interface, right, create a different experience of perceiving the world together or not, and the fragmentation. And like that's, for instance, like why I propose that Twitter needs a multi-quote tweet feature, because it needs more synthesis. It needs more ability to say, hey, look at these two ideas, I think they've got something in common. Whereas currently Twitter is very divergent, like things sort of, you can have many replies to one tweet, but you can't have a reply that's a reply to many tweets. Like you can't kind of ever, oh yeah. I really like that feeling of like, of like arriving, feeling like rest, peace, fit. Um, yeah. So that is something of me and what it's like to be me, and a little bit of what it's like to interface with me in a kind of implicit way.
Nice. So do you wanna get meta about what we just talked, what you just talked about, and kind of, you know,
Sure.
so my, so I guess the context that people don't have if they just watch this video is that we were originally having a conversation about you know, doing marketing for Complice, which is your uh intentionality app, right?
Right.
And just
You didn't even
thinking
mention it in this intro.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So that, isn't that interesting? I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, like, so the first question that I would almost kind of feel compelled to ask within the earlier frame of what we're talking about is like, how does all of this talking about interfaces and interiority like relate to Complice, maybe? Which
Mhm.
I'm curious about, but I don't know if that's the most interesting question for me to ask. I guess even before we get into those things, I would ask, like, how did it feel to make this particular introduction? That is there anything that notable?
Yeah. Um, how did it feel? I was like, I felt a bit nervous, but I felt like I was getting the thing that you said you wanted, of like
Mm,
facing a really blank slate.
mm,
Like I felt the sense in which I was like not assuming that people knew anything about me, and
nice.
there was something fun about introducing myself into a context that I expected would be relatively capable of understanding me,
Yeah,
but that where I wasn't taking for granted that people knew anything about me. That was a nice kind
yeah.
of blend of situations. Um, yeah.
Have you written or said much about interfaces before, like this?
Um, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so part of what I was doing in my introduction was I was like shoehorning in a little bit a question that you asked me. Like I sent you a message that was like, um, I'm interested in writing stuff based on someone who's asking a question, and I'm curious what questions you'd be interested in hearing me answer. If nothing particularly comes to mind, no worries. I have lots of other writing prompts. So I sent you that back in December, like 4 months ago,
Mhm.
and uh, and you said I'd want to read something that's basically what's it like to be Malcolm Ocean, written for Visa Candy.
Oh,
There's something of a hidden elusive quality in, or something of a hidden elusive intent in there I can't quite point at directly. So this is me slightly answering that question.
Yeah,
And
right.
I suspect the, like, what's it like to be Malcolm Ocean thing, like, I probably would have said something about interfaces if I had tried to write a blog post about that, because part of what I think it is to be like someone is certain patterns of paying attention. It's like the kinds of things that you notice. And
Yeah.
that itself, to me, at least, in the way that I notice things, occurs to me as a kind of interface. It's like the kind of interface that people have with the world is their attention function and what they notice. And, you know, John Vervaeke has a great paper and videos on this talking about relevance realization and, like, you know, what things feel relevant to them.
I
It's
was
one
just sorry, go ahead.
it's one thing for something to be relevant to a topic, but what does it mean for something to be relevant to me? What does it mean to be relevant to you? What does it mean for it to be relevant to us? And I think a lot of times we're not even quite asking relevant to who. We're just like, ah, oh, this feels relevant somehow. And you can sort of leave the to who question unasked.
Interesting.
It becomes clear as you feel into it.
Yeah. And so I was trying to take a couple of notes, and one of the things that was interesting to me was that in describing and introducing yourself, you cited like someone like Donald Hoffman's, and then just even before I was going to say that, you just cited Vervaeke, and like to be a person who cites other people's work when describing themselves, I think that itself is a revealing element of what it's like to be a particular kind of, I don't know if it's a kind of person, but like not every.
There's some people who would do that, and, you know, and other people who wouldn't possibly occur to them. You know, they could do 100 introductions and you know, well, and I would say there's probably people who, you know, could do 100 introductions and never say anybody else's name. There's other people who would do 100 introductions and they'd actually end up naming a bunch of their friends or, like, you know, things like that.
Yeah. So in that sense, like, that is one of the things that tells me about what it's like to be you, right? Like which is to be Malcolm is to quote the works of people in casual reference, right? It's just part of explaining an idea that is on your mind right now or relevant. Yeah, so I don't know if how much longer we're gonna keep recording, but I guess the thing that I typically nudge like my clients, for example, in these processes is I ask things like, so imagine that the thing that you just laid out, imagine that's like ground zero or like a foundation stone, or, you know, the central crossroads from which you are now tasked with building out like a city or building out a tavern, whatever building metaphor, raising a barn around this, right? Whatever. And like, how would everything orient around that? And I don't know if anything comes to your mind that you would want to answer, you know, in this recording to save for posterity, or if you want to like end it and think about it.
Yeah. Well, I do have at least some piece of an answer, which is also related to your question of, like, how does interfaces and interiority relate to Complis? And so one aspect of that is just the design of Complis. So Complis is this app that I've been running for 9 years, and it's been how I've made my living through that time. And I made a business that really plays to my strengths in terms of interface design. Like, there are not a lot of like complex algorithms in Complis. Like, there's a couple, but like, I've not necessarily solved any like deep new technical problems with building Complis. But there's a quality of attention that I've been paying to the interface and to the kinds of things that get enabled by the constraints. Like, you know, one of the weirdest constraints in Complis is, like, it looks like a to-do list manager, but you can't actually make a bunch of lists and just queue things up for the future. It's all very much about what are you actually doing today. And that's like been this very interesting constraint to play with. And what was I going to say about that? So that's about interface, but it's also about interiority, because part of how I do interfaces involves a kind of perspective taking. Like, I am trying to imagine, like, what is it like to be a user encountering this interface, which is this interiority thing. And there's also something where, like, I would say Complis, more so than a typical task management app, is sort of about interiority directly, which is that instead of having tasks, which are like an external thing that exists out there, Complis has intentions. And an intention is a thing that exists in an agent. Like trivially speaking, right? If you have an intention and then you die, I think everybody agrees the intention is gone. But if a person has a task and they die, well, the task is sort of still there. Like maybe somebody else needs to do it now or something. Like the task can exist without the person, but the intention can't. It's a subjective first person experience of, there's this thing I'm going to do today. Yeah. So that's something that I really love about Complis, is it does try to get people back in touch with that sense of like subjective choice and the internal feeling of like working towards stuff that they care about, rather than just sort of trying to check the boxes because the boxes are there to be checked.
Feeling it in interiority, intentionality. What am I thinking? It's funny to have this conversation because we've talked about a bunch of this stuff before a bunch of times, and so it all feels familiar. I almost wish there's a third person here that could like to witness how it would land for someone else. And I guess we start imagining. Oh, I guess at this point we can end the video and ask anyone who is the third person to. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, comment below.
Let us know.
We should also put a link down below to the workflows conversation we had a few months ago, which is on YouTube,
right?
Where we talk a bit about like how different ways of like interfacing with yourself and intentionality and stuff like that.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. People who are watching, and if you're still here, let us know what questions you have or what comes up for you. I'm curious to hear what people think. And I will end the recording here.